Well, we're so glad you decided to join this session. We're going to be talking about Tableau from an enterprise IT perspective. Just by a quick show of hands, how many of you actually work in enterprise IT? Well, you're in the right session. Thank you. And another quick show of hands, how many of you have actually been Tableau admins or worked on the Tableau platform for over 6 months? Awesome. Perfect. Thank you. Well, we're going to be sharing a lot of best practices. There are several sessions at this conference here which are very specific to certain areas of the platform, but this is one that is going to tie everything together, right? So this is a broad session. We won't go very deep, but we are covering a lot of topics here. So we may run a little bit short on time. So if you can hold questions towards the end, that'll be really great. Grant and I will be here after the session as well. So if we can't answer all the questions during the session, please catch us after that. My name is Abhishek Singh. I lead the consulting delivery team for Tableau. We have a global team of architects and analysts that work with large organizations at a global level on a daily basis. I joined Tableau 4 years ago, and I joined as an architect myself. Prior to joining Tableau, I was the enterprise IT. I worked for a large publicly traded education company. And when the opportunity came to speak on this topic, I love Tableau. And I think I know a thing or two about IT. So I decided to jump on. So here I am. Joining me is my friend Grant.
Hi, good afternoon, everyone. I'm Grant Eden, and I'm a solution architect with Tableau. I have been with Tableau for about a year. Prior to this, I've been in the BI industry for about 20 years, and part of that time I have been on the other side of the table in IT, where I managed a business intelligence competency center for the largest health insurer in the Northwest with about 4,000 users getting analytics. And so I've been on the other side of the table, and I kind of know what it's like to have to juggle an analytics solution from an IT perspective, and I hope to bring to bear a lot of those skills and background for you here today. And just on a personal note, earlier this summer, I had the good fortune to get down to Peru and visit Machu Picchu. And travel is one of my favorite things, and I have to say that Machu Picchu is one of the best trips I've ever taken. So if it's on your bucket list, by all means, it has my highest recommendation. So there are a couple of other sessions that you may want to download after this track. These occurred yesterday, so you can download the materials and the recordings. The first one is around building, deploying, governing, and working with, or building, deploying, governing, and working IT, or working with IT for Tableau deployments. This goes into a little bit more detail around best practices and how to introduce a self-service analytics solution. And then there's also an administrator's toolbox session that talks about how to build a Tableau utility server so that you can monitor your Tableau server. Now for this session, I'll just give you a quick overview of what we're talking about today. So the objective of this session is really to help IT become more comfortable on the journey with Tableau Server, especially as you get started. And so by the end of this session, as an IT professional, it's our goal to make sure you feel more comfortable about what you're going to have to think about and care about in terms of sizing, architecture, governance, and so forth. So we'll talk about the key areas IT should be thinking about. We'll also demonstrate how Tableau Server is deployed at Tableau to give you a sense of how we manage it from an IT perspective internally for our users. And then we'll touch on some best practices for published data sources, backups, maintenance, cleanups, things like that. Okay, so this is really broken down into 4 different areas. The first area is around infrastructure. So this is all about sizing, fault tolerance, failover, number of cores, things like this. Then we'll move on to talk about governance. So governance is around licenses, how you manage your Tableau deployment, content publishing, and security, and so forth. And then we'll move into data. So we'll talk about some best practices for using Tableau to expose published data sources and create trusted sources of information via Tableau. And lastly, we'll touch on operations. So this is around backups, maintenance, upgrades, and other best practices. So let's dive into architecture. So one of the first areas IT is usually concerned about with Tableau is things like how many cores do I need for this server? How much RAM do I need? How many nodes? Do I need a load balancer? And that sort of thing. So let's talk through a few different examples. Some of the things that IT cares about are scalability. So this is a matter of, will the application perform now as we expect it, as well as down the road as usage grows and more dashboards come onto the system. Also with performance, are users generally getting the level of performance that they're expecting from the system at all times of the day? Is performance acceptable even during peak analytic periods? And availability, is Tableau having enough uptime to cover the mission criticality of it to the business? And lastly, keeping Tableau up to date. Are maintenance and upgrades and so forth, are they being delivered in a timely manner to stay in tune with support and so forth and the features that the business requests or expects, new features and so on? So let's talk about each of these in more detail. So typically, the way deployments start off at most organizations is a single node of Tableau Server that is generally just an 8-core server that's serving up reports to a small department. And over time, the easiest way to grow this type of footprint is simply to add more resources to the node. So you would scale it up by adding more cores or more RAM. And this is a great way to get going with Tableau and get a deployment stood up and grown as you need to. However, it has its limitations. For example, you don't have high availability or segregation of specific tasks to different nodes unless you do what we call scaling out. So as a second step, most IT organizations at some point in their Tableau journey are going to start looking to scale out their Tableau deployment. And this is what scaling out looks like. You'll typically have 3 nodes so that you've got a minimum of 3 nodes so that you've got a quorum for high availability and fault tolerance. So if one node goes down, your Tableau doesn't go down. And then you can also do things like dedicate certain nodes to certain processes. In this example on the screen, we have a node that only processes background subscriptions and extract refreshes. This is one of the #1 ways you can enhance your Tableau footprint is by setting up a dedicated backgrounder to keep those extract refreshes from dragging down VizQL performance. So this is a typical example of growing out Tableau via scaling out. So in terms of performance, there's some key areas to think about. If you're virtualizing Tableau, please use dedicated resources. This is an area where you get what you pay for, so don't be penny wise and pound foolish by trying to virtualize Tableau on shared resources. Tableau is an intermittently resource demanding application, which means it will go out and grab all of the available resources it can for brief bursts when it needs to service user requests. So this is why we recommend using dedicated resources if virtualizing. Also, remember that the minimum Tableau specs are exactly that. They're just minimums. And if you want the maximum performance from your dashboards, you're going to need to deploy on as fast of hardware as your budget will allow. And if you're on a subscription license, consider implementing an elastic architecture model where you'll have nodes spun up or down or changed at night to do different processes. Like maybe during the day you run more VizQL nodes or you lean your architecture more towards VizQL processes, and then at night you spin up more backgrounders. Or maybe if you're a retail customer, around the Black Friday period, you might spin up additional nodes to handle all of the analytic needs that occur around the holiday shopping period. And then you spin them down once the shopping season closes down. So in terms of high availability, if you're after making Tableau a mission-critical application with high availability, you're going to want to front your architecture with a load balancer. And that load balancer should have session stickiness by either IP address or cookie. And that basically, and you'll also want it to detect any outages of your gateway processes so that it can route requests to available gateway servers in your Tableau architecture. So this is fundamental if you want to have a highly available Tableau architecture, load balancer. Additionally, if you're looking into disaster recovery, typically this is how it's done. You would set up an identical disaster recovery architecture in a different data center, and then you'd have nightly synchronization processes which capture backups, ship them over to the other data center, and then you'd have a process via your load balancer where you could redirect user requests over to that disaster recovery architecture. And I'll actually dive into this in a bit more detail to show you how we use this to accomplish upgrades and patches and so forth internally at Tableau. And in terms of keeping Tableau up to date, we are an agile software company. So we are releasing new maintenance releases every month with quarterly updates introducing new features, usually around the end or the beginning of quarters. So we try to introduce new features to the business quite often, and you'll want to agree on some type of an upgrade schedule that makes sense for your organization and your business users so that they're kept up to date on Tableau. In terms of infrastructure, you may also be deploying Tableau on multiple servers, multiple clusters. So we recommend at a minimum that you deploy obviously a production environment, but additionally you'll want a sandbox environment where you can test new patches and upgrades and so forth without risk of impacting your production environment in case something doesn't work out correctly. Then there's also the disaster recovery environment that you might want to set up as well. In the case of having multiple clusters, you'll want to make sure that every cluster uses exactly the same settings to the maximum extent possible. The more you synchronize settings and set up the same kinds of behaviors and processes across the board, the more you'll make life easier for yourself as you maintain Tableau. So in terms of managing Tableau Server, there's several different tools that IT should be aware of that are not included with a Tableau install by default. And one of them is, the first one is built into Tableau by default. That's the Tableau repository. You might be familiar with the admin views in Tableau. These are really built-in workbooks that look at the repository, which contain traffic and security data, usage data, and so forth. And you can use those to get an initial handle on how your system is being used. There's a number of custom admin views that are available out in community pages, and you can also connect to the Tableau repository and write your own views. Also, we have a tool called Tabmon, which is available on GitHub. This is like a Windows Perfmon type tool, but it's specifically tailored to Tableau Server. It monitors resource utilization by process, user concurrency, and a whole variety of other stats, and it puts them in a dashboard. There's also another tool called TabJolt. TabJolt is a GitHub tool that enables you to do load testing. So it helps you identify the pivot point or inflection point where your Tableau server will begin to experience degrading performance as usage climbs. And you can do some A/B performance comparison testing to answer questions like, what if we move from on-prem to cloud? What if we change hardware types or upgrade the operating system or upgrade Tableau? That's what TabJolt does. And lastly, there's LogShark for analyzing logs. And anytime you send logs to Tableau support, they're using LogShark to dissect them and look in the logs, and you can do the same thing as well. Let's look at a real-world example of Tableau Server. This is how Tableau deploys Tableau Server internally. So this is a quick cross-section of our company. These stats were taken from May of this year. So our Tableau server gets about 1.6 million views a month. We've got nearly 200 server cores. We have 2,200 users of Tableau Desktop, and we have about 600 to 700 publish actions where somebody is either updating or publishing a new dashboard every 30 days. And then when we introduce new beta software, we've got 200 participants in our beta program. Our Tableau architecture, or Tableau as a company, is a global organization. We have employees all across the globe. What we have done is deployed 3 different clusters for our architecture. The main one is the one for North America that you see there in the center, and its name is Alpo. Alpo has optimized WAN connections to our other deployments in Singapore and the UK, and we redirect users to the appropriate Alpo depending on where they're coming from. And this allows us to minimize traffic across the pond and make sure that users have an experience that's tailored for them depending on their geographic location. And we use data replication to accomplish this with our data sources. If you've used Tableau Server Admin for a while, this screen should be familiar to you. This is the actual view of our North America Alpo cluster. So we've got 6 nodes there, and the first nodes that you see there on the left side of the screen, which are known as primary and worker 1 and 2, those nodes are dedicated to running VizQL processes. So they handle all of the dashboard interactions and loading of dashboards, things that users actually wait for when they're seeing a spinner in Tableau. Those processes run there on those 3 left nodes. On the right side, we've set up dedicated backgrounders. So we have 3 backgrounders that each have, it looks to me like about 16 cores, each all running backgrounders, and those are processing subscriptions and extracts. What that does for us is it isolates the heavy backgrounder usage that we have from impinging on the VizQL performance. So users enjoy snappy response times in Tableau while the extracts run on different nodes. And you can see here, and I've seen this at many Tableau customers, the backgrounders can get pretty busy during peak reporting periods where they're spinning and running all day long doing refreshes. The reason we've set our architecture up this way is represented in this diagram. This is basically CPU utilization by process across our 6 nodes that we saw on the prior screen. The orange nodes on the top are our VizQL nodes. So you'll see that's really kind of spiky data that corresponds to human beings logging into Tableau and interacting with dashboards. So it goes with the flow of mornings and lunch hours and people winding down for the end of the day. And then the blue bars on the bottom, that's our backgrounder resource utilization. And that's pretty consistent throughout the day. And that's why we've isolated these two processes so that they don't step on each other's toes. When it comes time to do an upgrade for Tableau, and we do upgrades very frequently because we keep in lockstep with the patches that come out. We're doing this every month. We have a primary North America cluster called Tableau Server Cluster A. There's a load balancer in front of that, and during normal operation, users just flow right through to the cluster A. When it comes time to do an upgrade of cluster A, we will point the load balancer to cluster B, which is basically a disaster recovery cluster that looks identical to cluster A. We'll do our upgrade on cluster A, check it out. If it's all good, then we point users back to cluster A via the load balancer. So it's a hot swap type thing. And the cluster that is running in the background that is the non-active cluster, there's a couple of flags we set so that subscriptions and extracts don't run, because there's no point in running double subscriptions and extracts on your disaster recovery cluster. We only run them when we need to. And that's essentially how we accomplish upgrades. And this type of thing should work for many IT organizations. Okay, and with that, I'll hand things back to Abhishek for a few minutes.
All right. Thank you, Grant. All right. Over to the fun topic of governance. Well, Tableau is a self-service analytics platform, right? So how does governance play into a self-service analytics platform? When you think about what governance means, your reaction might be something like this. And that's totally okay. There has to be a fine balance between providing access to business users to the data that they actually need for analysis, and making sure you're providing the right access and they can trust the data that you're providing them, right? So it doesn't have to mean chaos. Governance is a very broad topic. High level, we will go through quickly a few of these. We will cover content workflow. How do you promote content from your dev to UAT to production? It's a very common thing we hear about. What do you do with your content that develops over a period of time? So ongoing content management. That actually is a topic that Grant will be covering in his operations slide. So I'll skip that. Security and auditing, super important, so we'll cover that briefly. You made a significant investment in licenses for Tableau, so we'll cover how do you manage licenses. And last but not the least, data governance. One of the first questions that we get asked when we go on large deployments is, what does a content promotion workflow mechanism look like? How do I move content from my dev to UAT to production? So when you are looking at a traditional software development project, this kind of a waterfall approach may make sense. But when it comes to Tableau, which is very agile, iterative, this is too complex and too time consuming. So our answer for doing something like this is instead to use a single Tableau Server environment itself and create multiple sections within that. And these could either be sites or projects, and we'll cover that shortly. You could have a sandbox environment where you have content which resides for a brief period of time, ad hoc analysis. You could be doing some test, right? So this is the sort of content which can reside on the sandbox environment. A lot of people will have write access to it because you want people to use Tableau, and everyone will have read access. Now, once you have content that is standardized, that is validated, that is approved, you can actually move it into a more standard area, right? So you will have much lesser users with write access, but most users will have read access to this area. This is a screenshot of our own Tableau Server Alpo project folder. So both Grant and I are in professional services, and these are two projects that we have created. And again, these are not sites, these are projects. One is professional services, which is the more approved, certified kind of an area, and the other one is professional services sandbox. If you actually look closely at the metrics on the content here, if you look at the view count, the workbook count, the data sources count, you'll realize that we have a lot more in Sandbox, right? Because this is where people come to play, to create the content, and then very few of these actually make it to the approved area, right? So this is a common scenario. I'd encourage using projects instead of sites, because when you're using sites, you cannot really share anything between those two sites. So if you use projects, you can still use the permissioning mechanism within Tableau to control access, but if there is a need to share resources between different projects, you still can. High level, let's also talk about the different personas or roles and responsibilities that come into play. One of the most important ones is that of a data steward, right? So these are folks who are very close to the data side of things. They may not be DBAs themselves, but they will be very close to people who actually manage the other systems that can help them procure data, that actually do a lot of ETL flow. So they have a good handle on the data side of things. They know complex data things like joins and unions and indexing and all those kind of things. Their primary task is to essentially procure data and provide it through a data source on the Tableau Server platform. Once data is provided on the Tableau platform, the next role that comes into the picture is that of a content creator or an author. So these are folks that understand the business requirements very well and can actually create content utilizing visual best practices. They can also create starter templates, and that's something which is fairly common as well. They can create like jumpstart templates or workbooks or views that other people can use just to start off, right? So they can create their own personalized views from there, or they can use WebEdit to create their own versions of it. And that is essentially your third category, which is essentially your consumers. So these are your end users. This is the bulk of users on your platform, typically, and these are folks who are actually using visualizations which are already published for driving business insights, or creating some new flavors of visualizations which are already published. Let's cover security and auditing. So the very first thing is authentication, right? So authentication, as we know, is how does Tableau Server know you are who you say you are, right? So that's the authentication. In terms of the identity store, Tableau supports local and Active Directory. In local, Tableau is storing the username and password. Not used very common, but in certain use cases, this is actually a lifesaver. We have a lot of enterprises using Active Directory, in which AD actually acts as the identity store. So we integrate with that as well. We also have a mechanism to synchronize groups within Tableau Server and Active Directory on a schedule. So you don't have to do a lot of onboarding yourself. You can utilize that synchronization mechanism. In terms of authentication mechanisms, we also support Kerberos, which is a little deep down integration with the Tableau Server platform. We also have support for SAML for a single sign-on authentication. We have trusted ticketing. If you have embed scenarios, we're looking at embedding a Tableau Server visualization in a portal. That's where trusted ticketing comes into the picture as well. Once Tableau Server has identified who you are, it needs to figure out what kind of content can be presented. So that's where authorization comes into play. Tableau Server does not use authorization from an outside entity. It has to be managed within the Tableau Server itself. And that's where an overarching role called a site role comes into the picture. This pretty much governs what you can do on a site once given access. There are also predefined roles that we ship with. There are around 6. And you can create your own flavors of it, depending upon your business use cases. We also have the concept of inheritance and override. What that means is we have nested projects on the Tableau Server platform. So you could define a permission at a high level that then propagates into lower level or nested projects. And if there is a business need, you can actually override by explicitly denying permissions or approving permissions at a lower level. So that's where inheritance and override comes in very handy. Data security is fairly important as well. When you talk about data security, you're looking at if a user A is logging in, the data that they have access to compared to user B may or may not be different. So it's important for Tableau Server to figure out exactly what kind of data should be provided to the end users. There are actually 2 ways of doing it. One, keep the business logic in your database itself, which may be possible, or keep that logic within the Tableau Server platform. When you keep this logic in your database, you have to make sure that all your Tableau Server users exist as users on the database itself, which is a little bit hard to do, right? So not a very common use case, but in some situations it is possible. In this case, when you publish something called a Tableau data source, you can ensure that you're actually providing a prompt for a username to enter their credentials. And this is then passed over to the database, and that does the authentication and provides the subset of data that the user should have access to. The other way to do this is keep this business logic within Tableau itself, right? So you could create data source filters. You may have an embedded password, which is like a service user account on the database that is embedded on the data source. But you're essentially writing a lot of logic using calculations, using data source filters that you can utilize to prevent a subset of data to the end users. One of the important things which is actually coming out in the next release, in actually 2018.3, is a multi-table extract. I don't know if folks have heard about that one. Up until now, one of the bigger problems in doing something like a row-level security with the entitlement table in Tableau was the concept of row explosion. I don't know if folks have heard about that one. It's like a Cartesian join. You have a small table that has users and what kind of access they have, and then you have like a fact table with a lot of rows in it, right? And when you do a Cartesian join, it just blows up. So this was a big problem in extract sizes on the Tableau server. However, with 2018.3 coming out shortly, we will have the concept of having an entitlement table separately and creating an extract for that. And that gets joined internally with a fact table extract. And that keeps the size of the extract fairly manageable. And when your extract size is small, your dashboards will load much faster. Grant has covered this a little bit already. In terms of auditing, you need to make sure you have a good handle on how your Tableau Server platform is actually being used. So one of the tools we use very commonly is actually LogShark. It's available on GitHub. It also gives you a lot of important KPIs and metrics. My favorite KPI, concurrency. That is really hard to figure out how many users are actually concurrent, right? Through all the admin views, that's not something that you can find very easily. LogShark provides you a very easy handle on what your concurrency is on the platform. You also have access to the admin views. You can always open your repository using a read-only or a Tableau user account to get some more insights on your platform. In terms of the license management, of course, you have access to the Tableau Server admin console, so you can actually take a look at what sort of users are configured on the Tableau Server platform, what roles they have, how many there are, how many licenses are still pending. So you have a good handle on that already. Starting 10.4, we have a way for Tableau Desktop to actually ping back to the Tableau Server and provide specific usage information as well. So you could look at some kind of an admin view. Actually, there are actually two on the Tableau Server portal itself. One of them actually gives you what is the usage for a specific Tableau Desktop user, right? So you could be looking at heavy Tableau Desktop usage where everything is good, but you could be looking at you've given a desktop license to someone and they're actually not using it, right? You could be looking at procuring it, maybe giving them more training just to make sure that you have good adoption on your platform. Data strategy is also a key element. Imagine giving access to the business users to data where they don't know things like joins and unions and all the database internals, credentials, where to connect. All they know is their username and possibly password for the Tableau Server platform, and that's all they actually need, right? So that's where data strategy comes into play. Tableau's answer to data strategy is actually using something called a Tableau Data Server, right? So what does Tableau Data Server provide you? It's a semantic layer, right? It does a lot of centralized access, resource management, and let's break it down one by one to see what it actually does. So on the Tableau server itself, you can create a data source and then you can publish it, right? And that actually is something that the Tableau data server manages. So essentially, it's a published Tableau data source, which is what Tableau data server is managing. Imagine a user connecting from different platform. It could be a Tableau desktop, it could be a browser, it could be a mobile device. And they're all getting access to a data source which is already published. Now, what is the advantage of using a published Tableau data source? Well, you don't have to install drivers on individual machines for users to connect to a database, right? All they need is their Tableau username and password, right? So that's one important thing. The other important thing is you can actually manage the metadata centrally. So imagine changing field names, creating hierarchies, those kind of things. You don't have to do it individually for each single user, right? You're just managing it centrally, publishing it, everyone is actually using it. So there's several benefits of using a Tableau data server. Another one is security. You can actually put in security on your published data source itself using data source filters, right? So when users connect, they only see data that they are allowed to see. Another thing that the Tableau data server does is it kind of abstracts what's happening behind the scenes. So an end user doesn't need to figure out, which tables are joined, what kind of joins are being used, which database to connect to, right? And the other thing that it does is also auditability. You can take a look at how popular a specific data source is, right? So you can take a look at how many views are connecting to it, how many workbooks are connecting to it, and this is something which end users don't have to know. So this is another key aspect of the Tableau data server. Another thing that comes into play is the question of reliability. Now, we've seen a lot of business users that may know just enough to be dangerous, right? So they may do some joins to get at some analysis, and they may not actually be joining tables properly. They may be joining some test tables which are exposed to them, and that creates big chaos, right? So there's a question of reliability that comes into play, and as long as you are utilizing published Tableau data sources, you can override that to a big extent. You can document these data sources when you're publishing. You can add comments, highlighting what tables are being used, what is the extract frequency that is being utilized, and that gives trust and confidence to the end users when they're connecting to it. Once you create a Tableau data source, the next step is essentially publishing it, right? I would exercise caution when publishing it. It's important to know exactly where you're publishing it. A lot of it is dependent upon how your Tableau platform itself is structured. If you have sites, simply because you have HR and finance data, which is sensitive, and you never want other users to even accidentally get access to it, then it's totally fine. Make sure you're publishing it on the right site. You could also be using different projects within the same site. So again, exercise caution for sensitive data sources. Just be cautious where you're actually publishing it. Just to recap, advantages of using the Tableau data source. Reusability, right? Create a data source, publish it, and all your community on Tableau Server platform, as long as they have access, they can connect to it directly. Which also means that not all the users are individually going to the database and extracting data, right? It's being done just once on the data source that you've just published. So that's a major advantage. We also talked about access control. We also talked about not having to share usernames and passwords of the database user with the individual user accounts. Another key thing, it clearly delineates the role of a data steward, which is actually creating and publishing these data sources, with that of a visualization expert, right? So if folks who are business analysts, who are very good in creating visualizations, don't need to know the internals of the database. So the more you use it, the better it would be. When you are publishing Tableau data sources, this is a good checklist to go through, and it's fairly important. It's available on our white papers as well, but this is what you can use to enforce standards at the time of publishing itself. Let's actually go through a few of these. You may have database tables that are storing maybe 10 years of data, but your analysis is only going to be for the past 12 months, for a year or something. So when you're creating data sources, you can filter it, right? You can make sure that you're only bringing in relevant data that will be used for the analysis. So that's the filtering mechanism. So back in the day when I used to create more columns and tables and databases, I would name them as FLD numeric or FLD string, depending on data type. So that's a fairly common thing. Business users don't understand it. So when you're creating data sources, you can actually rename these fields. And that's a good point to keep in mind so that end users know exactly what they're connecting to, what these fields contain, by making sure that they are named properly. You can configure data types as well. So it's fairly common that sometimes in a database, you may have a string field that is actually storing a date, right? So you can change data types at the time of creating your data source as well. You can create hierarchies. So think about city, state, country, or different business units. So that's something that you can do once, and all users can benefit from it. You can apply formatting changes. So if you have percentages or decimal points after 0, all those things you can apply as well. Your financial year start dates may not always be 1st of January, which is by default. So you could change that as well. You can add new calculations. So things about like age derived from date of birth or profit percentage. You don't want all the end users to create their own versions of the calculation, one of them actually creating it incorrectly and then driving wrong insights. You can create all these calculations at the published data source level itself, and everyone can benefit from it. Oftentimes, when you're creating a data source, you might create some test calculations or some duplicate calculations. Good idea to review what you have and just remove what is not needed. Because once you do publish them and you start generating extracts from it, you don't want redundant data to reside on your Tableau server. You can always aggregate data at the highest level itself. You may be collecting transactional data, which is up to the minute or up to the hour, but your analysis may only be on a per day basis. So you can aggregate data to a higher value, to like a date or even a month or year, depending upon use cases, and that will dramatically cut down the size of your extract file. You can hide unused fields. So if you have sensitive fields like a social security number or a tax ID or something which you don't want to expose to the business users, you can always hide them in the extract, in the published data source. And when you create an extract, they will actually not go in the extract file. And once you create a data source on the Tableau desktop, don't forget to publish it, because that's the only way end users will actually use it. Another thing that we didn't talk about in detail is data source certification. So this is a functionality that came through in 10.4, and we've seen a tremendous improvement in our governance strategy just by using a simple certification framework. So when you create a Tableau data source and you publish it on the Tableau server, you have an opportunity to certify it. Certification is nothing more, but it's a simple badge that you provide. When you certify a data source, you can add comments stating why it's certified, what is the process that actually used, who's the owner for it. So you can add a lot more details that puts a lot of trust into that data source so that business users know what exactly they're connecting to. I would encourage, if you're using this, try to come out with a workflow that all the different sites or all the different project leaders can actually use. So there's a standardized process, right? So we shouldn't have a proliferation of different mechanisms and different processes for certifying data sources in your organization. Ideally, you should have one centralized way. Certified data sources also get higher priority when you're searching or when you're creating a new data source. Certified data sources always go right to the top. Over to Grant for operations.
Okay, thanks, Abhishek. All right, so a couple more things to chat about with operations. So this is going to include things like backups, maintenance, disaster recovery. We've touched on that a little bit. Things like packaged installs for your Tableau desktop. So let's talk through a few things in this area. So number one is backups. Hopefully everyone in this room with a Tableau server is doing daily backups now. If you're not, that's definitely something you'll want to do. And I've put up on the screen here the different commands that are needed depending on your release of Tableau server. And in a well-run implementation of Tableau server, what we like to see is a long historical record of backups that we can restore back to. And you can script this out. And as a best practice, what I try to do is script out for my customers that we'll keep 7 nightly backups, and then we'll keep 4 weekend backups, so that lets us go back in time up to a month, and then we'll keep 12 to 14 month-end backups. So over the course of 14 months, I can restore back to almost any point in time in case somebody came to me and said, oh, a workbook got deleted or a data source or something, I can always go back in time. Or if somebody said I needed to, this new version of Tableau isn't performing like the old one, I could restore an old backup. So this is a good thing to do to set up a backup strategy where you're keeping those backups on a storage area network or NAS appliance that's highly available, and just capture them every night. And that backup repository can easily consume up to several terabytes, so just bear that in mind that you'll need a lot of space for it. Another thing that's great to do is the practice of running maintenance. And think of this like garbage collection. So as Tableau is running and creating extracts and so forth, over time it begins to accrue log files as well as temp files, and as well as also HTTP requests in our HTTP request table inside the Postgres server. So maintenance is a command that you can run both with the server running and with it stopped, and each way of running it cleans up a slightly different set of files. And I've been to customer sites before where they're not running any maintenance, and then I go and I run the maintenance, and instantly we recover 60 to 100 gigabytes of disk space because there were a lot of temp files and other kinds of things that just weren't needed anymore. So as a best practice, try to run maintenance at least once a week or once a month. It doesn't need to be run nightly, but at least monthly is a good practice. So also, over time, your Tableau server will begin to accrue lots of ad hoc workbooks and data sources that aren't really used anymore, or disused workbooks, particularly in those sandbox folders that Abhishek mentioned, where it's a little more unstructured and users are allowed to do whatever they want. So you'll want to set up a cadence where you are using maybe a script built in the REST API to analyze your old content that maybe hasn't been touched in 30, 60, or 90 days, and archive it off or delete it. And I work in professional services, and we've actually developed such a script that we sometimes implement for customers. And it just runs nightly, and it does things like query all the old workbooks, and it emails their owners, and it says, your workbook hasn't been used in N number of days, say 30 days or 90 days. It's about to be archived off, and then the next time the script runs, it actually archives it into an archive project. And then eventually, once it's been in the archive project for a long enough period of time, we just delete it with that script. So you'll want to build something like that, because as your Tableau server ages and accrues more content, you may have thousands of objects or hundreds of objects that just aren't being used, and sometimes they're on extract refresh schedules, so they're kind of pulling down the server, but nobody's even using them. So you'll want to audit that and take care of that in an automated way. Then in terms of upgrades and patches, as I mentioned, Tableau releases a new patch every month and a new release with additional features every quarter. Your business users will love you if you can keep up with a quarterly release pace in introducing new versions of Tableau Server and Tableau Desktop every quarter. But in practice, it's more realistic to try to do an upgrade maybe every 6 months or so if you can. So you want to define what that upgrade pace is with your business users, get agreement on it, establish it, and then hold a cadence on what that's going to entail. And of course, having a sandbox environment is going to help a lot with that. Another thing that really helps is if you'll package up your desktop installers. There are white papers online or articles that we've written that explain how to do silent installs, and this allows you to do a managed deployment of Tableau Desktop through your service. Different organizations have different terms for it, but kind of like a service marketplace where you can download trusted apps. If you deploy Tableau in that way, you can do things like turn off the auto upgrade feature so that ensures everyone in the organization is always on the same trusted version of Tableau Desktop. And you'll want to make sure that anytime you do a server upgrade, that all of your desktop users and your prep users are using exactly the same version as the server. Okay, so I think that brings us to a conclusion here. So let's just wrap up what we talked about. So in this session, we talked about architecture and some of the things that IT needs to think about in terms of cores and nodes and load balancers and how to structure your deployment for high availability. We also talked about Tableau's internal deployment and gave you kind of a glimpse into how we run Tableau internally for our 4,000 plus employees. Then we touched on governance, so some of the things that IT has to think about in terms of managing security and authentication and organization of projects and so forth, as well as data sources, how to make use of best practices around published data sources. And then the day-to-day operations of backups and so on that are in IT's purview. So hopefully you all feel a little bit more comfortable now about the end-to-end big picture of what IT needs to think about for Tableau Server. Now, toward that goal, I've collected here a number of white papers that you'll see on the screen that are geared towards IT, that dive into a lot of these topics in more detail. Now, each of these is a hyperlink. So if you go into the TC18 website after this, you'll be able to download the materials for this presentation. And in this slide deck, you can just click on each of these to go through these different white papers of topics that might be of interest to you. And then we'll have a Q&A period in a moment here. I just wanted to remind everyone to please review this session and any other sessions you've attended in the TC18 app. We do take those reviews very seriously, and we like to make sure that we're putting on the best content here for you. So we welcome your feedback and encourage you to provide it to us. So thank you all for your attention and for attending this session, and I hope you have a wonderful time at TC, and I hope everyone here is planning on coming to Data Night Out, because it should be a blast. And at this point, I'm happy to take any questions that, yeah, sure. And when you have a question, if you could come to the front of the room and speak into the microphone, that would be great. Let me just make sure it's on here. Do you know if this is on?
I'm just talking to the one on the show.
Okay. I didn't see the switch. Okay. Yep. Well, I'll repeat the question.
Is it on? Maybe it's not on. So I have 150 users, and keeping track of licenses and managing that whole process is a challenge. And I've looked at the license report on the admin views, and I'm suspecting that a dozen or so of those people never publish to the server and don't actually sign into the server and maybe send out TWBXs for people who use Tableau Reader, which I wish they wouldn't do. But is it accurate to say that the license report only reports on people who connect their desktop to the server, or how does that pick up?
Yeah, that's a good question.
Thank you.
So on the Tableau, so the question is, how does the Tableau desktop reporting to the Tableau server actually work? Do they need to sign in from the Tableau desktop onto the Tableau server so we can collect that information? And the answer to that is actually no. So when you install Tableau desktop, as long as you're doing it using a script, you can provide a parameter to it that actually is essentially a URL for the Tableau server, which acts as a reporting server, essentially. So even if the Tableau desktop server is never using server sign-in, as long as they're just opening their Tableau desktop, the Tableau desktop will collect the information periodically, which I think typically it's 8 hours, and will ping it back to the Tableau server. So you don't need to sign in from your Tableau desktop to the Tableau server for the Tableau server to collect that information. That is true. A regular install does not give you that option, so it has to be a scripted install.
Or you can provide the keys needed to the registry or the Mac plist file that have that URL that Abhishek mentioned. And there's an article on our online help that talks about that. So you can either do it manually or do the scripted install. Any other questions?
So our team we're going to the user-based licensing creator viewer
Okay.
and explore. We want to know if the setting up a DR system is going to violate the licensing, or if a DR system has any impact.
Normally with a server license, you're allowed 3 environments. So production, a sandbox, and a DR environment with your server license.
With the user-based licensing, right?
So as long as you keep your DR environment shut down, so you're not using it concurrently at the same time, you should be okay.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thanks.
Yes.
Yeah, so I had 2 questions. So the first one should be really quick. I was curious how much memory you guys had on your servers. You had listed out the cores, right? But how much memory? And then the second one is, when I'm starting to put these hypers up here, and we're just getting started, right? If I need to isolate data to Germany to meet some GDPR requirements, how do you guys typically handle that in terms of making sure that data is maybe only residing in country or something?
So the first question, if you email me after this session, I will get you the answer to, because I don't know the RAM offhand. The second question that requires a little bit more thought. So you need to keep the data, certain data in country. Without question, you could do that with your own with a dedicated server cluster. And you could set up your security model in such a way that objects that contain German data are not available to Tableau users who are not in the German geography.
So just to answer your question, recommendation is actually, for the first one, recommendation is to actually use 8 GB of RAM per core that you have on the Tableau server. So if you have an 8-core server, the recommendation is to have at least 64 GB of RAM, right? So that's the correlation. For the second one, there is no easy answer. I think your question is more around not so much on the access side, but how do you even know exactly where you store it?
Country data sovereignty.
Right.
So, I mean, in some instances with government stuff, you have to
Right.
have it in that country.
So you have to even store the data in that country itself. Unfortunately, all I can think of is you have to have an instance or a cluster in that location itself. Because if you have a distributed installation or an installation somewhere else, I mean, as long as you have a file store configured, your extracts will reside on that machine that could be outside of that country. So you'll need a cluster in that machine, in that country itself.
My question is around the backups. I think over time with enterprise deployment, with actually backing up both workbooks and also the data sources, the size of the backup is becoming huge. And most of our data sources actually come from relational databases or databases where we actually can get them. So is there a way to just back up the workbooks, not so much with the data sources? Right, I mean, for us, there is no need for us to actually back up the data sources.
So that's a very good question, and I can see the rationale behind it. So essentially what happens is when you create a workbook, do you know exactly where it actually gets stored, that workbook itself? It actually gets stored in the repository, right? So essentially you're looking at taking a backup of your Tableau's Postgres repository, which you can actually do because, I mean, it's essentially a Postgres server. So instead of relying on the full Tableau backup, which is going to back up everything, you could just back up your repository itself, right? Because then you could restore it somewhere else if needed, and you can just extract your workbooks if needed. However, with that technology, you'll not be able to restore it in a way. You can get access to it, but you'll not be able to reuse that to restore it with the Tableau backup.
Right. That's the direction we've been going, but as you said, the restoration, I mean, we back up because of restoration, right? I mean, if it's difficult to restore, I mean, it's no point in just backing up. So we actually have to back up the whole thing.
I think a few things which we've heard very commonly from most of our customers is one that you just pointed out, and the other one is actually incremental backups, right? Not everything is changing all the time. If you have 100 gig of data, why do I need to back up everything? Maybe only 1 gig has been added since the last time you backed up. Unfortunately, it's not there. It's on the list. I would highly encourage upvoting it on the community so more people take note of it, and hopefully we'll make it in the roadmap.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Hi, can you just clarify the relationship with Tabmon and Tableau Services Manager? Just so make sure I understand it right. Tableau Services Manager essentially eclipses that for versions 2018.2 and further. Or can you just clarify that?
So TSM manages Tableau services, so it lets you set up the number of backgrounders and VizQL and so on.
Right.
Tabmon is more of a tool that runs on a utility server that looks at your Tableau cluster, and it pulls all the services through their JMX ports, and it says, how's your heartbeat, how's your health, how much CPU are you using, RAM, and it gathers a lot of stats out of your Tableau cluster and writes those to its own database. So it's kind of separate from your Tableau server. It's just looking at it, much like a blood pressure monitor and seeing what's going on inside the server.
Okay, so
Does
that'll
that help?
still continue to be serviced through the future iterations, like Tabmon will. Like it still works.
It still works. Yeah.
Unless you actually meant TSM and tab admin. So TSM does replace tab admin, because going forward, all the tab, in fact, that was the command that actually Grant showed on the backup slide as well. So instead of using tab admin, you have to start using TSM now for 2018.1 and later. But yeah, tabmon still persists.
All right, thanks.
Hello. We currently have an 8-core server, just one server, and we're starting to grow. We've had it for a year. And I'm looking at understanding at what point do you know when you need to kind of expand your environment. So in our case, a lot of times we have to cost justify things, and I have to prove that we need to get the additional licensing for our server, like the additional 8 cores. So how do I do that to my management before the server collapses?
Well, I can describe one method. So one method would be using performance, slowing down of vises as a justification that the hardware is inadequate during certain peak periods. Yes, and a couple ways you could go about doing that is, one is you could run some of your most popular vises by yourself during a time when you're the only user on the system and record those timings. And you can even sometimes just using something simple like a stopwatch to do that, and then see how they are during a peak period and do a comparison how much slower they run during periods when lots of users are on the system. We have a tool called Scout that can also help you do that. Scout literally pretends to be a user. It logs into your Tableau server from your own desktop or utilities machine, and it iterates through all the vises that it's authorized to see, and it records the amount of time it takes to load those vises. So you could run Scout, say, at 11 p.m. and see what performance you get, and then run it Monday morning at 9 a.m. when everybody's loading vises and see what the delta is between those. And that can give you some data points to say, look, the Tableau server is 30 or 40% slower during peak reporting periods. That's a justification to expand. So that's one area that you could be looking at. Another thing is if you're seeing high backgrounder usage, especially during peak reporting periods coinciding with times people are in the system rather than at night, that can justify having a separate backgrounder so that the backgrounder doesn't slow down your VizQL performance. And maybe you've had some other thoughts on that, but those are what come to mind for me.
Yeah, I think isolating the backgrounder is an important one. I think that's the slide that Grant has as well. So I think knowing exactly if your performance for the views, and actually there's an admin view that shows you an average load time for the visits over time. And if you see that really going up over time, that's a clear indication you need more hardware behind the scenes. Even if it's stagnant, if you have a lot more extracts that are actually running at peak times during office hours, that's justification enough to add another node just for the backgrounder itself.
Or if high availability becomes an expectation too, then you need more nodes. And more nodes means more cores. Mm-hmm. Sure. So the question was, do we have zero downtime upgrades internally at Tableau Server, Tableau with our own Tableau Server deployment? Is that correct? Yeah, I think correctly. So I don't recall saying that exactly, and I'm not on the team that does that upgrade, so I can't say for sure it's zero downtime, but it should be very low downtime because it's literally just a momentary switch of the load balancer back and forth, so it should be nearly zero. Maybe it's a minute or two of downtime or a few minutes to make that load balancer switch, but it is not hours for us. It's a matter of seconds or minutes. Yeah, I think that's getting into the details that I'm not personally familiar with, but I think they probably capture a backup very close to the time that the upgrade is about to happen and then do a cutover, or they may have delta loading scripts to just copy over changes in the Postgres repository.
Yeah.
If you drop me an email, I can try to find out more details for you later and share those with you.
Yeah, high level, I would just add, a best practice when you are trying to aim towards a zero downtime upgrade is the server, which is actually your backup server. You could probably run a script so that users don't have publish rights, right? So they still use it on a view for viewing reports, right? That way you're not actually adding more data to that server, so that when you flip over, you're actually not losing anything. The only thing you're actually losing is usage information. because if people are viewing vizzes, that's getting stored in the repository. So yeah, just changing the permissions, removing publishing rights is the right strategy there.
Sure.
So if you have a lot of data sources, right, that you publish, and you have a data dictionary that's attached to it, what's the best practice to have those data dictionary be available to users that's using the data source?
So the question is what's the best practice to attach a data dictionary to published Tableau data sources, correct? And your data dictionary is another vendor's tool, right?
It could be an Excel or a SQL.
Yeah.
Like that, like these are all the fields, and this field makes this and this is pulled from some business table, and you mentioned it at the
Okay. So I'll take it, or
Yeah, I would say utilizing the comments feature itself, you should be able to add a hyperlink or a network file share where you're actually storing all this information. So that will go in with the Tableau data source itself when you're publishing it. You can't really add all of that in the comments itself, unfortunately, because it could be really in different structure and format. But as long as you have it stored somewhere, either it's a hyperlink or a network file share, you can add that in the comments field. Unfortunately, not a real tight integration, but sort of a link.
So that hyperlink would be part of the comments at the data source.
Exactly, exactly.
Does anyone have any other questions?
Just, I think I know the answer, but it used to be on 64-bit desktop to go to 2018 and then
That's correct. You
10.5, right? 10.5.
well, I believe 10.5 was our first release that was purely 64-bit.
Yeah,
Is
I
that
think
right?
so too.
So by default, if you're on 10.5 or higher, everyone should be on a 64-bit only release. Are you on an old operating system like Windows XP, or? And that's not a, so you've got 32-bit Windows 7. Okay. So you probably need, I'm almost 100% certain you'll need the 64-bit OS to install the newer versions of Tableau.
Yeah.
Okay, thanks.
Sir?
This may be difficult to answer, but with the new features that we saw this morning and yesterday, what impact like for like will we see on server performance? Do you take that into consideration? Have any insight on that?
That's a great question. So the question is, do we anticipate any changes to server performance with the new features that are coming out? And that's always an area that remains to be seen through the field and through I work in the field, so I kind of see things how they are from a customer's perspective. I suspect that some of them, like the search experience, Ask Data, that's going to be a process that'll probably run at different times, and perhaps it can be scheduled during off hours, and every process that runs uses a little bit of CPU and a little bit more RAM. So probably I would anticipate just a little uptick on RAM and CPU, but from the features and as I understand them, I wouldn't anticipate needing to add more nodes to handle them necessarily. But
It's probably hard to distinguish that between that and our usage growth, because it's growing exponentially. Just good to know.
yep.
So we are planning to move to the cloud. So as we move to the cloud, I would like to know, like, how can we use Tableau to say, like, if it is good to move to the cloud or better to stay on, how can I get that?
Okay. So that's a great question. So the question was, he's planning to move from an on-premise to cloud, and how could he use TabJolt to validate that the performance is good enough in the cloud? Is that right? Okay. So what I would probably, you can actually record or download the recording of our TabJolt session in the TC website, and that will go into detail about how to do that. But you'll basically set up a TabJolt server and a set of workbooks and measure their performance in your on-site, on-premise system, and then take that backup from your on-premise system and copy it over to your proposed cloud server architecture, and then point your TabJolt to that other server and iterate through precisely the same tests. And then in the comparison workbook for TabJolt, do the delta comparison, see what run 1 was compared to run 2, and that will give you the answer of how the cloud environment is scaling differently than the on-prem environment, or perhaps they'll be the same. Does that answer your question? Sure.
If
That's a good question. I'm not able to answer going forward plans, but I can tell you a couple of things. We are now, with our current release, we've just introduced an API that it allows you to query and expose the backgrounder and see what it's working on. And I understand there's an intention very soon to enhance that so you can do things like terminate jobs and so forth. I also am a big fan of using custom schedules. So I will set up specific schedules for sandbox content versus trusted production content. My sandbox content always runs at a lower priority than the trusted production content. So I start to segregate schedules and make different express lanes for, here's for the executive dashboards. They use this schedule that's high priority, and then these other schedules use lower priority lanes, if you will. So that kind of gets towards that way, but with what you're asking for a special dedicated backgrounder, but I haven't yet heard any plans about a custom backgrounder for certain types of tasks.
In one of the other sessions, they were talking about that, being able to prioritize or have it dedicated to certain types of tasks. So that's something that we're going to find.
Yeah. Good question, though, because that need does kind of pop up from time to time, depending on how much backgrounder usage you've got.
Yeah, on the admin views, we have backgrounded tasks for extracts and backgrounded tasks for non-extracts, right? So you would imagine that as the non-extracts is actually growing and growing and growing, as long as you can dedicate it to a different node so they don't get stuck behind, because your data extract refreshes are going to consume a lot of resources and a lot of time in most cases. And you can't even control it because many of them are actually published by end users that you can't control. So I see the need for it. Looks like it may be in the works.
Yeah. And starting in 2018-3, it's my understanding that by default, a couple of previously not so much hidden, but not well discussed or well-known parameters will be activated that will cause your backgrounders to prioritize jobs in the order of their historical runtime. So the fastest jobs will run first. Let's say you release 100 jobs all at once and the backgrounder's queued up with a big long queue. It says, okay, the ones that are the shortest running jobs you get to run first, and the slowest running jobs historically, they run last. And so that'll reduce your backgrounder delays and encourage or reward content developers who build fast, efficient extracts and so on. Yeah. Yeah, so that should be turned on by default with 2018-3. Sure.
You mentioned the auto archive script that you had. We have 60 sites and over 1,600 workbooks.
Yep.
So how do we go about getting that?
Well, in professional services, we normally implement it as part of an engagement, so we can talk to you about that and see what's involved in tailoring it to work with your sites and setup.
Okay, great. I've already sent you an email.
Okay. 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 Can we answer any other questions? Well, thank you all for being so attentive and have an awesome TC.
Thank you.
Yeah.